but they were just stories. Or perhaps they were not. In the past, I would have disregarded such tales, but who would believe mine if I told it to them now? I switched the engine off and parked several meters away from the cliff edge, switching off any lights and composing myself for what would come. I sat in that car for what seemed a lifetime, the only companion given to me by the occasional splash of water against the cliff below. I waited.
Welcome to ChronicleVibe, your channel, your place where you can come and hide from the reality, get immersed in different universe of different stories.
Bedtime, Whitehouse, Part 8. Sleep tight. I am shaking as I write this. I was released by the police less than 2 hours ago, and I am compelled to record the events of the past day and night as quickly and as accurately as possible. In some ways, I want to forget, but I know that I cannot. I know that I should not. For my own sanity, I must divulge what has happened. It is far too important. Should I ever allow myself to be swayed by the mechanical, rational nature of the world once again, these words should serve to remind me that what is unseen is both mysterious and frightening. After Mary left, I knew that I had lost her forever. But rather than be consumed by the depression and inaction, I was invigorated by one purpose, by one thought, by one idea that I knew I had to carry out. I had to destroy that thing, for I could not allow the chance that it may one day hurt my loved ones or desecrate the innocence of another child. I also knew that I faced death, but feeling that I had already lost everything, there was a small price to pay. It is said that revenge is a dish best served cold, but having waited my entire adult life to be rid of this thing, its memory and the shadow that it had cast upon me, I met the proposition of killing this fiend, this corrupt and perverted force, with a smile on my face. That night it would be dead, even if I had to drag it to hell with me. Busying myself for the next few hours, I packed a bag and wrote a letter to Mary and my family, explaining what had happened and that they were not to blame. I phoned my mother and father, then my brother, just to hear their voice one last time, but I did not let on that I thought I may never speak to them again. My mother's intuition led her to ask if everything was alright. I smiled, and I told her I loved her, before reluctantly saying goodbye. At about 7 o'clock, I made my way out to the car. The sun had already set, and the street seemed eerily quiet, as if the scene of an unattended funeral. I sat in the driver's seat, leaving the door on the other side open, awaiting my most unwelcome passenger. By 9 o'clock, nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. The place remained deserted, and the cold night air flowing through the open door was beginning to bite. As I sat there, contemplation echoed through my mind. I ruminated on the nature of this cadaverous parasite. One question rose out of a sea of thoughts, towering above all else, unmoving and continuous. Can you kill something which is already dead? I did not know if this was a thing of the grave or some unworldly spectre which could be considered alive in some way. But just as I was re-evaluating my plan, there it was. It was subtle at first, but there was a small, almost indistinguishable shift in the suspension of the car. Had it been any other circumstance, I would have put this down to a gust of wind pushing and pulling at the chassis. But I was all too familiar with that feeling from all those years ago, as the bunk bed would shift slightly, with the thing climbing into the bottom bed. I knew its foul calling card. The air grew denser, as if contaminated by some nearby corpse. It was in the car with me. Unseen, yes, but there was nonetheless. As I heard the slightest of whispered breath from the back seat, I leaned over and calmly closed the passenger door. I turned the key in the ignition, and as I pulled out of the street, I could have sworn I heard a quiet yet distinctly malicious snigger, as of something mocking me. Did it know what I had planned for it? Our destination was not far, but the roaming hills through which our taken country road penetrated rose up and diminished with regularity. A stark reminder of the ominous isolation of night. Occasionally on the way I could hear something from behind, but I refused to look for that thing in the dark. Patience. It would not be long before I could confront it. The irony hit me. I was worried about scaring off the same thing which had terrified and tortured me as a child. I had to be resilient, and so drove carefully and calmly through the countryside, swamped by the darkness, hoping that my unearthly passenger would not suspect me. I arrived. The wheels of the car struggled and slid on the undergrowth as I headed off of the narrow country road. The landscape had opened up, and as I looked at the broken and rotting trees around me, I felt that it was fitting to come to its bleak place in the cold night to destroy that bleakest of things. The land suddenly came to an abrupt end. A cliff edged out from an old quarry, looking deep into the black waters of the lake below. The cliff edge was relatively flat and had in fact at one time housed a road which had subsided into the lake decades earlier. The local kids would tell stories about the vengeful ghost of those killed during the subsidence, but they were just stories, or perhaps they were not. In the past, I would have disregarded such tales, but who would believe mine if I told it to them now? I switched the engine off and parked several meters away from the cliff edge, switching off any lights and composing myself for what would come. I sat in that car for what seemed a lifetime, the only companion given to me by the occasional splash of water against the cliff below. I waited. This thing was smart. Of that there was no doubt. It had toyed with me, relishing the pain and torment it had caused as only something of a coldly frozen intellect could. For this reason, I knew it would suspect me, and perhaps even flee if I brought that car too close to the cliff's edge. I had to wait for it to attack, let it feed, let it revel and gorge itself on me. Perhaps then it would not notice as I slowly plunged the car into the dark, icy water below. I was going to drown the bastard. I had appraised the potential consequences in my head and reasoned that there would be a moment, a singular moment, where I would have a slim opportunity to escape from the car just before it reached the edge. Mary and I used to go there occasionally, a place to be together, away from everything else, and it did not look nearly as dark during a summer's day. I therefore had the place in mind, and knew it well. The drop was at least 30 feet to the depths below, and I did not want to be in that car as it hit the water, nor I wanted to be trapped inside with that abomination. I waited, then I heard it, slowly at first, and then increasing in rate and volume, a rasping, wheezing breath from behind. Strangely, it sounded more labored than before. Each breath a struggle filled with fluid, rotten and decayed. A shiver ran up my spine. A rank, foul smell began to fill the air. The breath drew closer from behind. My heart began to race, beating hard and fast as I looked up and saw the windscreen begin to ice up from inside. I could see my breath, a natural thing indeed, but what was unnatural was the breath visibly moving across my face from the side. I turned slowly. I wanted to cry, I wanted to leave, run into the night, but I had to stay. I could not allow it to escape. It was sitting in the passenger seat. I was staring at it, and it was staring at me. Hunched over, covered by darkness, contorted, gaunt hands seized as if fighting rigor mortis. It slowly moved towards me. One bony leg cracked and groaned as it slid over my lap and onto the other side. Oh God, it was sitting on me. It pulled itself in close to me, and through the shard of light provided by the moon, I saw its face. Skin hung from its jagged features. Glassy eyes stared deep into me as its grin spread out through its face, unnaturally wide as a result of its half-rotten flesh, exposing the rotten muscles, broken teeth, and sinews of its wrenched smile beneath. Pulling closer, it opened its mouth, revealing a wet and putrid tongue, which could be seen through part of its missing jaw. Wheezing, breathing heavily, a foul stench which stung my eyes and filled my mouth, elicited a response from me as I wretched, my body attempting to expel its poisonous fumes. And as I did so, it stopped for a moment, then cackled to itself, happy, content. Staring into its icy cold eyes, it yet gave the impression of an afflicted and increasingly weak old man. It was still incredibly strong, but it seemed as though it had lost some of its potency. Perhaps leaving the elongated room had somehow affected it. Its long, protruding fingers caressed my face, and then, as a show of intent, it stuck one of them deep into my shoulder. I screamed as it bent and twisted inside of me, the rotting fiend moving its finger to cause the maximum amount of damage and pain that it could. As it did so, its other hand slid down against my body. It touched me. It was time. With my free arm, I turned on the ignition, and though my shoulder was still pinned to the seat, I managed to fight through the pain, put the car into gear, and took off as fast as I could. The creature flailed and screamed. It attempted to climb over me into the back seat, but I held on with all my strength. The thoughts of what it did to Mary, enough to fuel my rage. We raced towards the edge of the cliff, and I eyed the driver's door frantically. As we neared our icy plunge, I screamed in anger as its festering, wrenched face and pushed it off of me. It scrambled into the back seat for dear life as I scrambled for mine by unlocking the car door. It was too late. The car carried over the cliff face, and before I knew it, we hit the dark water, splitting the black glass-like surface with tremendous force. I should have died then, but an airbag took the brunt of my impact. Bedtime by Whitehouse. This was part 8. In the next weekend, I'll be uploading the last part. I hope you guys are enjoying the series as it's coming to its very end. Please hit the like button and comment and share. And if you guys want to stay connected and listen to this kind of stories, please hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys again in the next week. Happy weekend, guys. Keep your imagination alive.